We're days away from the election, and election laws are being contested around the country. The Nevada Supreme Court just issued a major ruling. Let's get into it. This is Dina Doll with the Legal AF channel. So in Nevada, I actually just returned from Nevada. I was volunteering as a poll observer. And so I'm going to tell you what I witnessed there on the ground, and also what the RNC is trying to do there. And they're doing it in other states. We've seen it. We've seen it in Georgia, Pennsylvania, Virginia, and Nevada. What they tried to do here in Nevada is essentially say, right now, the Nevada law says that if a ballot is received within 3 days of the election, 5 p.m. within 3 days after the election, that it can be accounted if the postmark cannot be read. Essentially, if there was a mistake by the post office, like if they've smudged it, or if there was no postmark at all showing the date that it was mailed, but it was received by the election office within the 3 days, then it can be counted, because our right to vote is fundamental, and we shouldn't have that deprived because of a mistake from the post office. Seems like common sense. Actually, Nevada had written this law, years before, but of course, the Republican National Committee and Trump sued the state, they sued the county registrars of voters, trying to stop the enforcement of it, saying that if the ballot was received within the 3-day timeline, but there was no postmark at all, that it shouldn't be counted, that the law should only apply if the ballot was smudged and you couldn't read the date. Now, the Nevada Supreme Court stepped in, and I'm going to explain their ruling and why this is so important. Because a lot of these lawsuits, as we know, you've been following along with Legal AF, Republicans have been losing over and over and over again. The Georgia Election Board tried to have those new 7 rules, lost. They lost at trial court, they lost at the appellate court, because they were trying to change election laws, and they're not a legislative body, just an administrative body. And so they can't. And so here, the same idea, like you would have thought if they had spoken to a lawyer ahead of this, the lawyer would have said, this lawsuit doesn't have a good shot at winning. The law basically says that if you have a postmark that can't be read, or the idea also being, and I'll explain the legal theory of why it also included no postmark at all, then this isn't a good lawsuit. Like, don't spend your time and your resources. The reason why they file these kind of lawsuits, knowing that the law really isn't on their side, is because they get that headline afterwards. And the headline afterwards is, the courts are saying that ballots can be counted within 3 days after the election, even if it hasn't been postmarked. It sounds bad. It sounds like some change by the courts or this loophole by the courts. It's Trump has been lying about the election since 2020. Our elections are very safe and secure. And I will talk about the poll observer of helping ensure that they're safe and secure. And so they have to do these kind of things, these lawsuits that are frivolous and aren't going to win, because they can have a court ruling that they can then twist, and they can say, see, this is, against democracy, or et cetera. So that way we all know why this law was so easily upheld by the Nevada Supreme Court, even though this is not a liberal Nevada Supreme Court. Let me just break it down, because we're going to be interacting with people. We're going to be hearing this. This is going to be the mantra for the next few weeks, is, how, they weren't able to have an election integrity because of all the fact that these courts stepped in. And that's not the case. And it's very, very easy to refute it. And so that we all know. So basically, this is what the Nevada Supreme Court said. So on the actual, they read the statute. The statute says that if you cannot see the postmark, then it should still be counted, because the idea, again, is that somebody's right to vote shouldn't be deprived because of a mistake of the post office. And then the Nevada Supreme Court there said, legally, when we look at interpretations of the law, if we cannot tell by the plain language, the language of the law, the intent, then we look at the history, the legislative history. What did the lawmakers say when they were trying to enact the law? What was their intent? And this is something courts do even for contracts between two people. If you and I make a contract and maybe there's a question over the language, they go back and look at the emails and the discussions. Like, what was the intent? Because sometimes maybe something couldn't be phrased in a way in a contract or in a law that was different than our intention. So they looked at the actual language of the statute, and it says that, if you cannot see the postmark, it should still be counted if it was received in time. And they said, well, let's look at the legislative history just to kind of make sure what the intent was. We think it makes sense that it would include no date at all because it's the same idea. It's a mistake from the post office. If you put something in the mail and it shows up at a location and it doesn't have the postmark on it, that's a mistake of the office. The post office, it's not up to you whether or not, we cannot physically put a postmark on it. So if the post office delivers it, but if they've forgotten to put postmark on it, that shouldn't be your fault. I have actually received stuff that hasn't had a postmark. We probably all have it sometime because, mistakes happen. So interestingly, the court looked at the legislative intent. And again, we're saying this because this law, there is no question about this law, that this was something that should not have even been, brought because it was so obvious. So one of the assembly persons, when they went to draft this law years ago, said to the extent that there were envelopes that were not postmarked, this is the exact situation we're talking about, or the postmark was illegible, smudged, or otherwise damaged to where it cannot be read, I think similar to the postmark requirement of 3 days, only of those that come in within that same period of time would be counted, and anything that came in after that would not be counted. And they quote a few of the assembly people who talk about that. The idea is it just didn't have a postmark, or you can't read the postmark, but it came in with the same batch of mail. It came in within that 3 days. So essentially, they would have had to have put it in the mail either before, or at that day in order for it to have been received at the same time. And if you can't, tell because the post office made the mistake, the voter shouldn't do it. So the Nevada Supreme Court ruled against the RNC, and I love it. They also kind of said at the very end, because they were asking for an injunction. The Nevada court was asking for an injunction, which you have to show that your likelihood to succeed on the merits, because you're asking for an action to happen before there's a consequence, right? Like nobody may show up without a postmark or a smudge postmark, right? It hasn't yet happened. When you're asking the court to make a determination before it's happened with an injunction, you have to show that if it were to happen, you would be likely to succeed in your lawsuit at the time and that you would be damaged. And the court said they would have a hard time showing they would be damaged, that even if for whatever reason, this law shouldn't include ballots that don't have postmarks, you have a hard time, Republicans, showing you're going to be damaged because in the primary back in the spring, they had literally 24 ballots in the entire state of Nevada, 24 ballots in the entire state of Nevada that didn't have a postmark. This is not swaying an election in any way, shape, or form. You're talking about 24. So you can't show damage. And then the court points out, too, that they did not show any evidence of fraud. They didn't even try because there was none. I mean, you're talking about 24 ballots. And they didn't try to track it down and see if, there wasn't fraud, but they didn't even try to see if there was fraud. And so they said, you can't show damages. You haven't even shown any evidence of fraud. And that is very telling. They file a lawsuit where the law is very clear. They file a lawsuit where they're only talking about 24 damaged ballots in the entire state. And they didn't even bother to show fraud. They did not intend to win this lawsuit. They did it for a headline. They did it so Trump and his, other people who like to talk with him about this stuff can use it as, look what the courts are doing. Look what the courts decided. They're allowing ballots to be counted that shouldn't be counted in Nevada. Look at this corruption, blah, 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 blah. It is a talking point. But here on Legal AF, we keep these things straight. Now you know the law. Now you know why this is not even close to an issue. And if you've got somebody bringing it up, you can now have the facts to talk about them. And I will go into this even more in some of my other videos. So, be sure to follow on my playlist for my other videos. But we have poll observers in battleground states in this country, Democrats showing up, because poll workers are nonpartisan and really, for the most part, do like a really excellent job. But knowing that there's a third party observer watching and reporting. I mean, I was at one of the polling sites that had so much campaigning before the 100-yard line. The 100-yard line, any campaigning is supposed to stop. And thank goodness there were poll observers, because there was so much campaigning up to the 100-yard line. And there were people with Trump hats, walking into that election polling site. There was somebody with Trump signs trying to walk into that polling site. This was a Democrat and Republican polling place, but the only people I saw who were trying to walk in with campaign hats were Trump. So for all their election integrity nonsense, how about just following the law? You can wear your hat, but respect the fact that our polling voting places are supposed to be neutral. Take off the hat, leave it in your car. So polling observers, there's so many of us out there just keeping everybody, hopefully to task. Like I said, the poll workers are great, but having a third party observer there to kind of make sure that these things are flagged and reported and enforced is essential. So I got my go out to vote sticker here. I voted. We got just a few days. Vote. Every vote, obviously, as we know, counts. So just follow along. Like I said, I'll try to give a little bit more detail about my poll observing experience and update you more on election laws and the development, so we can stay informed and combat the major misinformation we know is coming around whether or not our elections are free and safe. My name is Dina Doll with the Legal AF channel.
In collaboration with the Midas Touch Network, we just launched the Legal AF YouTube channel. Help us build this pro-democracy channel where I'll be curating the top stories at the intersection of law and politics. Go to YouTube now and free subscribe at Legal AF MTN. That's at Legal AF MTN.